Hello and welcome to a new episode of The Ramp. Today we are super excited because we have Christoffer Herheim from Optio Incentive with us. Welcome to The Ramp.
Thank you, Tor. Thank you. Love being here. Heard a lot about or even listened into many of the episodes and think it's super. And knowing you from before, I look forward to the conversation.
You're probably the dude that I know that knows most about equity, and it's a complex topic, right? So I think people will be very eager to learn a bit more about it. All right, let's look at the equity and compensation topic in itself. So, and maybe more from a scale up or founder point of view, looking to design their equity program. What are the options? Let's say hypothetically, I'm building an AI scale up.
Yep.
I have traction.
Yeah.
I have a team of 20 people.
Yeah.
Okay, what are my options?
Yeah. I think it's, if we start a bit off, like, I think the most important thing is to start off, like, what do you want as a company? What sort of people do you want to attract? And think of those things in combination with other compensation elements. Because that will kind of give you some background things. But if you assume that it's a company paying a bit less than what you would have gotten if you were in a bank or in a consultancy company, so you need to kind of provide something extra, and that you really have growth ambitions, and that you, as of now, are perhaps located in Scandinavia, but you have global plans pretty fast, then I would say, first of all, you start looking at, are there any pre-qualified tax plans? Normally, I'd say don't go that direction. Don't start with tax. But because of that, it's a startup. There may be some very favorable programs in your country that kind of takes the discussion a bit away. So very often that is, if you're below 500 people, 100 people, Norway, we have one of the hardest needles to get through. But like if you're under X number of employees, your company founded less than 10 years ago, typically you have a balance value in your company below X. Then you have some sort of favorable program you can use. And what that often comes with is what kind of tax and when do you get taxed? So that's a general thing for all countries. And what you want to do, you want to get into a case where you don't get what we call dry income tax. So let's say I exercise an option, meaning, okay, I pay 10 for a share at a point of time where the share is actually worth 100. So you have 90 in value. But still, you can't sell that share. You just kind of acquired the share because it was a part of your option program. 90, if you then get taxed with an income tax, it's typically like you get 45 in tax, right? And you have nothing to cover that tax because you can't sell the share because you're not a listed entity. So you're in trouble. The company also typically get the social security or NIC accrual or NIC costs at that same point of time, which can also kill the company. Because this can turn into a lot of money way before it's any liquidity to pay anything. I think that's number one thing to think about. But generally, those programs are stock option programs, meaning that a promise to buy a share in the future for a price we set today, but you have to render some services to the company. Typically, it's a 3-year period or so. So that's like directly onto one program type. But there are other things as well that we can cover, and saying that, let's say, if we don't think so much about that and go back to what you really want to achieve, then we can say it's very important for us with this person that we succeed because it's a first person commercially in the DACH region, an example. Then you can say you get 2% of the company if you reach 5 million euros ARR in the DACH region by X, right? If you don't reach that, you don't get anything, right? So then you can tailor something based on your KPIs or important strategic things, and that can be whatever. It can be number of sunshine days. It can be typically like revenue. It can be EBIT if it's a bigger company, right? So that's a performance share. Then it's an option, and then it's a performance shares. Both of those are quite common. Also need to cover like just buying a share, because if it's very, very early, pre-revenue, I would say like then you can say you buy at market price, and market price you can argue is 0 because you haven't really found raised any money. Then I'd say go to that one first. So
like a naked in, naked out.
Correct. It can be that, but it can also be just like buy shares with an activity duty. So we can buy it back to the lowest of what you acquired for and market price if you leave the company before 3 years, right?
Like a vesting element.
Correct. So you can say like if it's pre-revenue, I would perhaps even consider that before going to these tax qualified plans.
Yeah.
Because it's the easiest way to just buy shares extremely cheap or almost getting it for free, and you would be in capital income tax later. It's a lower rate, and it's first when you sell the share, and then you have money, so it's okay. Yeah. So that's like the high level versions, and option, performance shares, and then buying shares. And there's others, but I think we can keep those elements now. I can, on a side note, just mention, if you're in Sweden, there's something called a warrant. You buy the options at time zero at a fair market value, and then you get capital gains tax and no social security. There it is a case where you have social security costs at 31.42%. You don't want that. It's super high. So you avoid that with that setup. And in Germany, it's these virtual stock option programs.
Okay.
So it's basically saying that you will never get a share,
Yeah.
but you will get a bonus equivalent to the gains you would have had.
Okay.
And that's everywhere in Germany.
Okay.
Because of that, there's a notary process, which is quite hard.
Yeah, okay.
So it's a bit old-fashioned way of granting the shares, you could say.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. How do you see the situation, especially in the Nordics now, compared to, I don't know, Germany you mentioned, or UK, US?
Yeah.
There's been so much criticism on the setup.
Yeah.
Is it functioning now, or do you think that because there was some adjustment a couple of years back?
Yeah.
Are you happy with those, or do you want them to?
I think I am of the opinion of that the way it is now, it's quite good for those that it kind of affects. Meaning, if you're small enough, if you compare that program, if you first qualify with the others, it's quite beneficial because you can get options to quite a big amount, basically, or kind of a high value. You can earn quite a lot on those options, and you get capital gains tax, which you typically don't really get even in the other ones, and you get the tax event first when you sell the shares. So those in combination is not so often done in other generally. The problem is that if it's a company grown out of 100 people plus, even they've even extended it a bit now, but still it's very slim, right? But it doesn't really. If you think of it from like a Norway perspective, Sweden perspective thing, it's like companies that have been growing up to 200, 300, 400, 500 people, they still really need this as a tool in order to build further more places to work in a way. So you really need that. I think other countries are a lot better when you come to a bigger scale, especially Norway is good when it's very small. Sweden has expanded this quite a lot versus Norway, so it's better in Sweden, no doubt about it. And then you have like similar structures in Germany, but you can get the tax when you want, when you sell the share, but you still need to pay the income tax.
Yeah.
And that is something that we in Norway, if we are a bit like criticizing how we look at things, we don't want that. Yeah. Because that's quite a lot higher tax bill. So it's not always greener on the other side. Yeah. But I'd say we have a lot to learn, especially from UK and US. In UK and US, there's super tax favorable programs, and it's a lot easier to really, really spread this around. So yeah.
How do you think about like the, I don't know, societal effect on like the equity programs in a way? If you think about, okay, what is driving the right mentality and the right direction of the economy? How important is equity programs into creating a growth culture?
I think it's just, of course, I'm extremely biased, but I think it's insanely important because one of the things that I sometimes think about when we recruit people, right? Let's say an early stage company, generally that we are the ones that should drive innovation. We will drive innovation. We're the ones that doesn't really have all the safety net that you would have in a big corporate. And that requires a lot more of the people. Hence, you should also have the best talent. Yeah. So, and then the best talent, then you actually compete with, dependent of course of what industry you are in, but you can say like you would compete against Deloitte, McKinsey, BCG, Bain, and all these kind of companies, right? And obviously you earn a lot more by going to these companies. Yes, you work super hard as well, but it's super lucrative. And it's not possible as a startup or a growth company to pay those sort of salaries that you have there. So either you have to pick from another shelf, meaning that you have to have less qualified people to do whatever in an extreme pace, or you need to have something else.
Yeah.
And I think that many of these people that we talk about here would be prone to kind of choose a startup if they were able to get a part of the upside that will come in an efficient and efficient and kind of big enough scale, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's. But when tax come in and ruins these things, complexity, it kind of it takes away the tool we have to compete on talent versus the banks and the consulting companies and all the others. So I think it's extremely important if we really think that innovation and things are built from smaller companies that can move. Yeah.
Do you have any data on companies with equity programs versus no equity programs in terms of performance?
Yeah, so I think when you look at early stage companies and growth companies, I would say pretty much everyone have something. I haven't almost seen anyone without, so it's a bit hard to kind of compare. Then it's more like, okay, how broad do you go and how much do you give away and in those sense. But I think there's been done some research on stock listed companies, and of course it's extremely hard to kind of isolate all the factors here because of that. There's so many other things that will affect the share price if you look at the share price and the others. And then there's some simple findings on it, but generally it's not good enough data on this because it's very hard to isolate the facts. So there are research that shows higher performance, but there are also research that didn't find that. So you need to be a bit balanced in it. So I think it comes a bit down to like people need to we can of course look at those data, but I also think that the easiest way is, if you have a stake in the company, would you work harder? Would you stay longer? Would you think about it when you go to sleep? Will it change your behavior? If the answer to that is yes, then of course it's anecdotal, but likely there are others like you. And then you need to kind of find the right ways of doing those things. Personally, when I kind of course it's easy to say when you're a founder, but I think how do you get as much value and kind of as much of a founder thinking into as many as possible. And that's a super challenging thing, but obviously like equity is one of the best tools to get that on board. So yeah.
When you advise founders, this could be maybe early stage founders in terms of the pool of shares that's offered to employees. Are there any typical benchmarks like at seed stage, Series A, Series B? And
here there's quite a lot of good data. So it depends on, as you say, at which stage. But when you come into a bit of like, let's say you are 20 people, 15 people plus, we typically say somewhere between 1.5% and 4%. And then we mean annually. So we typically advise to do this like as an annual program. Very early, we see that people include everyone. And when you get to a certain stage, you start thinking more kind of key employees and so, because it's a bit hard to go, if you are 100 people and you're doing 2% and you really need to incentivize those that really pull their weights plus. They need to have enough to feel that this is something that is worth the efforts that I'm doing. So often it gets a bit more hierarchical in terms of how you award things. But you can also do like some sort of a more flat program in addition, like saying everyone can buy shares at like 5,000 euros a year, right? Just to kind of get the ownership feeling, and you'll get the money into the company as well, right? So just facilitating that. You would rather raise a bit of money from your employees than investors. If you were, that's at least what I feel. Of course, you shouldn't raise the money from your employees to kind of fuel the company, but you can do both, right? So it's a nice thing if you're in a position to do that, I think.
And what about the perception of equity in a way? Norway, we're a very immature startup country or market in a way, compared to, for example, Sweden or UK, US. In those markets, my at least feeling is that they know it's more common. They know more about it. How would you say sort of the perception of that is, especially in Norway?
I think in Norway it's getting better, obviously, but I think like I've had some dialogues with some owners, with quite a few owners, and you see that there's an extremely difference. So if you are call it like a VC that typically look at and have your role models in Silicon Valley, right? Then it's not a problem. They would know this. They know how important it is. And not to kind of out anyone, but it's like if it's more kind of municipalities owning or kind of funds spun out of the electricity kind of setups. So it's not, everyone is not in this bracket, but more of them are, it's harder to kind of understand why should we give away this, why should we give away this, right? They have their salaries and so it's more difficult with the traditional kind of money, older money setup than in the VCPE parts. In the VCPE parts, I think it's closer to what we see in our peer companies in other countries. But in again, it's a bit different on what type of owners we talk about.
What about the enterprise companies with like the CVCs, like the corporate venture spin-outs? In those cases, we hired a lot of executives and stuff, those companies, but they have challenges because they can't offer equity. Is in like difficult. So do you have any good workarounds there in those situations?
I think generally all companies can do it. So there are some challenges if you're kind of governmental owned, and there's some directions there. There's also, if you have big institutional owners, there's some kind of proxy advisors checklists that you need to comply with. But that's, they don't say no. They just say that it can't be more than this. You need a cap. You can't earn like ridiculously amounts of money. You need to kind of, you can't do it to boards or at least not options to boards, right? So I'd say this is, in my opinion, this is a bit like misunderstanding sometimes, because they don't really, there's something there and they don't touch it. But if they had dived into one layer deeper, then they would have found out that we can actually do it. So even with like, if you look at the stock exchange in Norway, if you look at Norway as one of the more conservative countries on these things, still you see that countries like, you know, companies like, we touched upon like Veidekke, Orkla, companies you would think is quite,
more rigid.
Definitely. They still have a lot of it, right? So I would say no, and there's no reason to do it. Even Telenor, right, and the government-owned companies, Storebrand, they all have it. They just need to comply with the rules that are relevant for them.
We talked now a bit more on the employer side of the perception of these programs. What about the employee side of things? I think the recent market events with Oda, for example, where development has not been positive in a way. A couple of years back, it seemed like there was a one-to-one link between cash in hand and equity, or at least you were in a much better position with equity setup. Now, I don't know, are people losing faith with the downturn?
This is always a challenge, right? Because it's a bit like investments generally. Like now investors are bleeding as well, and then employee investors are also bleeding a bit. I think, yes, the perceived value of equity is lower in periods where there's been a lot of examples that equity has not turned into something. If you go back to like, and this is generally all over the world, at least in Europe, right? So 2019 to 2022, this was a great thing. There was a lot of sunshine stories and everything was like, can I get equity? Can I get equity? And it was worth a lot more in perceived value for employees. Now people are a bit more like, I've already invested. I heard these and these stories of it kind of dropped in value. And that's true. So I think the point here is more of like, the hard thing with employee shares is that this is not, very often, this is not qualified investors. This is people that work in a company, they get their pay slip, and they also see something that there's a share program, and they kind of jump into that. So the employers have a big responsibility in, call it marketing the risk as well. It's not only an upside, at least if it's investments involved. And then it's all about information, because it can be really great, and it can be very bad. And then again, it's like some tools, like with option programs, you can't lose. Or you can lose if you exercise and then it drops, right? If you have a tax bill, but generally until you exercise, you can't lose. So that's a reason to choose that instrument. If things have been a bit bad and you have employees that have lost money, then give some free opportunities, right? So on the question, I'd say definitely macro and how things are working affects the perceived value of instruments. And it's then important to be good at communicating things in the right way.
Seems like prior to 22, people were more open to doing less base and more equity or options.
Yeah.
And now it's like, I need that cash.
Yes, yeah. But this is also, I think this is a super, super interesting topic, because what we dive into here, like if I give you 100 options in Optio and I give me 100 options in Optio, what is it worth for you? What is it worth for me?
Yeah.
If I give you a 1,000 kroner or euros or whatever, and 1,000 euros or kroner to me, it's worth 1,000 euros or kroner.
Yeah.
So this is like, and what I mean here, it's like, what do you think about the future of this company? If you think it can be worth 1 billion, and I think I'm a more risk-averse person, I think it can only be worth 1 million. It's worth a lot more for you, and I should get cash because I'm the risk-averse person. And if you're able to kind of dig a bit into this, of course you can't make an individual program for everyone, but if it's possible to at least play a bit with this and understand this, that perceived value is value. But it's super interesting.
And I think the perception, again, like back to what your system also does is showcasing the value.
Yeah.
And I think companies that fail to really showcase the value development, then it's just wasted.
Yeah.
Because, like, let's think about it. Okay, we want to create a common incentive system. Let's pull in the same direction. But what you want to make sure is that employees really see the value and that they feel it's basically a compensation and salary and whatnot.
Yeah. And here it's so often that we hear like, and I have in recruitment cases, right? You try to hire someone and you kind of, okay, you benchmark my base salary is this and I have this option set. Now I have this bonus set up and I have some options, but I don't really know what it is, right? And there's some option things here.
Yeah.
And then the point is like, is it really worth the potential upside you give away as a founder or as other shareholders if they don't know what they have? I mean that the answer to that is definitely no, because you haven't really done the job by just giving it away.
Yeah.
And then it will be 10% understanding what they have, because those are kind of Excel and equity geeks, and they don't need anything extra, right? But you need to follow up, and if you do it in a system or not, right? Just ask yourself the question: are you doing enough to promote it and to make it top of mind, right? Both for retainment of people, but also motivation and performance and everything. I think it's important.
Yeah. And then there's been some recent studies on the inequality of equity, where there's differences between what women get in terms of equity and also men. So what's your reflections on those studies?
I think it's super difficult because it's also very complex, right? It can be many reasons of why it is like that. It's a fact it is like that. One thing is, of course, like starting and looking at the same positions, different gender, which also the study do. But we touched a bit about it earlier. So one explanation may be, I don't know, but maybe that what is your risk appetite? And anecdotal, I think we see a bit that men tends to be a bit more like a golden retriever puppy, running around being super enthusiastic about everything and not really so risk averse. If that's the case, they would be more like, yes, I'll take equity, I take equity, and base salary is not that important. Of course, if you look at the same studies on pay, that kind of takes a bit of that argument away, because men also earn typically just as much or more. So, but that could be one thing. Like you need to be risk willing to kind of potentially go a bit down in salary and pushing towards getting more equity, and then following not just the risk averse, but pushing. I think also like men tend to be the same as in job interviews, right? They, I'm generalizing now, but it's like, I think they tend to be more, I'll manage, I'll do it, even though they don't have any sort of like, qualification to do it, they jump more for thinking, right? And these things may be a bit connected, because if you push more onto I want more, you're really more vocal about it. That's also when you get more. Yeah. I hope that if this study had kind of been able to deep dive also into that same effort, same approach, same risk appetite, then it should be more equal. But I don't know. Yeah. I hope, because if that's not equal, then we have a bigger problem, right? Yeah.
This is a bit of a meta question. You're advising founders and companies on equity programs. What's up with Optio incentives? How do you address it?
We only use cash. We don't believe in equity. Yeah. No, we since start we did this or kind of employee stock options to everyone. That was an important part of our recruitment part. So up until, I don't know, 20 people, everyone got options. We used about 2% of the company every year. We still do as kind of a frame for allocation. We also do another 2% on employee stock purchase program every year, meaning that all the employees are able to buy shares.
Yeah.
There are some people that are allowed to buy more than others, but everyone gets the opportunity to buy. This kind of relates a bit to responsibility. So people with more responsibility can invest more.
Yeah.
So we have those two strings to play on. Now we have changed a bit in terms of like the option program are a bit more sharp. Let's say we're 100 people and there's, I don't know exactly, but let's say there's 35, 40 people that would be eligible for options and everyone for shares. And we believe in that if you're a constant frequent visitor in the top performing pool over 5 years, you should be stuck with an decent amount of shares and also hence a decent amount of the value creation in Optio.
Yeah.
And that's a bit where we want to be, but we're quite performance oriented and we don't want to give to everyone now. Yeah.
And how do you measure a success of an equity program? I don't know if you've done that on your own programs or seen a lot of cases with clients, or what are the KPIs?
I think this is also a thing that we want to do a lot more on, but it's not a lot of good data. I think how you can measure it depends a bit on what you want to achieve with it. But we see that, let's say you are struggling with churn, and then I think you should do your own survey as a company before you kind of do any of these measures. And after, like, did churn actually reduce? And then, of course, it's a good ROI because you can use less new hirings, and the cost of kind of doing that is obviously extremely high. That's on the churn/retention side of it. On performance, I think it's even harder because then it's more like, okay, what is performance on the people that get equity? You can, of course, do it on the performance reviews and add it as a layer there, but it's a lot of other factors that will screw things up a bit. So, but I think something around that on a company level, on a stock exchange or a stock listed company, you can, of course, measure stock performance before and after. Yeah. But then everyone would say, okay, but the oil price and the Trump and all these stuff that will, so it's super hard. But that's at least some of the ways that I mean, you can try to get some value. Yeah. And I think at the end, if you're a founder, you will feel it as well. Yeah. Because it's like if you see people that think like owners. I sometimes use it a bit internally as well. We have bonus setups related to operational targets. I hate it. I think it's very bad because of that. These short-term goals, they change, and you don't want people to run after those things. So ideally, all the bonus targets were directed to shareholder growth because that should be much more flexible. You started off with doing ICP small companies, but during the year you changed because you saw that was important, and then all your bonus agreements were off. If it was shareholder value, it's always related to kind of the long-term things, and you are so much more agile in your priorities. Yeah. So
if we look at the equity programs, or any specific trends that you see that companies are moving towards a specific solution, or any changes in employee behavior?
Yeah. So on trends, it's globally. There's a trend that the program gets broader. This is driven a bit by some very big owners. There's an organization called Ownership Works, started by KKR and Pete Stavros, and like the really, really successful people on that side. So KKR now more or less only do all employees in all the companies they acquire. Yeah. Before, these kind of private equity companies, they had acquired a company with 2,000 people and 15 got like these management incentive programs. Yeah. That is changing. So generally, this is being moved a bit by that. So broader setups. There's also a trend with more ESG targets, obviously with the focus on ESG on companies, especially on the listed part. It's hard to measure ESG, but that's putting that into some sort of the compensation mix, also the short-term incentives and the bonus arrangements.
Might change now with politics and
definitely. So this is, and to be honest, this is a bit of a, like, I think many of the ESG things that I've seen is more like put it in because we need it and we will score better on XYZ, and then it ends up being a discretionary yes or no. So that's the negative thing, right? So I think that's a bit of the challenge. Other trends is that I think it was a period where it was, this is a bit different country from country, but I think generally there's a political movement that there's more tax qualified plans, and I think that's a very positive thing. There is kind of loosening up globally, also here in Norway. And then obviously tailoring the programs to those geographical setups, and knowing those is crucial. Otherwise you can't really compete on talent.
Any big typical errors or mistakes that founders are making when they're implementing these programs?
I think the biggest mistakes often is related to tax. Because unfortunately, like if you go ahead and you design something and then suddenly let's say one example. So we've seen a couple of cases where you say you get options now, the options vest in 3 years, and they think we want everyone to exercise it within, let's say, 3.5 years. So we have 6 months window, because you think it's good to not have so many outstanding options, and you really want them to become shareholders as soon as possible. That thought isolated is great. It's correct. The challenge is that if this is not a pre-qualified option scheme that delays tax and gives you capital gains tax, let's say it's a company that is worth 100 million NOK, 10 million euros at grant. It do a 10x during that period. So you're at 1 billion NOK to kind of keep with that currency. And then this program for one participant, or let's say 10 participants, suddenly have a value of 100 million NOK. In gains. If it's a total, and then you have 6 months to do this. And then of course you need to exercise those options within those 6 months. 100 million in gain, but that's gain that is worth nothing, or it's worth something, but it's a long time until you can pay your bills with that gain because it's stuck in shares in an unlisted company. But you will get 45 million, 50 million in tax bills for those people. And the company will get 15 million in a social security setup. So that is something that we've seen, luckily not so often, but you just need to be aware of those mechanisms when you design it. I think another thing is related to time. So you also don't want people to potentially be very rich and leave before the job is done. Meaning that if you are a listed company or even an unlisted company and there's some equity transactions coming on board, you've done a lot of great things, but you haven't really commercialized it, but you have a hell lot of traction on stuff and you're valued at a lot. And then your key people are able to sell or exercise the options and sell the shares and become wealthy way before you actually kind of productified it and made it into success, and then half of your core team disappears as investors.
Chips off the table. And
And then so point here is align time and goals of vesting with strategical goals in the company. Not just bring along the option agreement you had in the old company, because that's also a very common thing to do.
Hence the 2030 IPO goal.
100%. And we actually do that. So we put like long-term vestings on it, and we are very clear when we recruit and saying that this is not something you will exit in 1 year with a high. It's like we need a 3-4 minimum year commitment. Hence the equity program follows that. We have a 3 and 4 year vesting period on it, and we were even kind of playing a bit around with like even longer and more performance-driven targets on it for the future.
We're talking about mistakes that founders are making. The principle of these programs is to retain people. What happens if you provide golden handcuffs and then you have a person that's not growing with the company? You have poor performance. They are like, how do you handle those situations?
The best way is saying that you have a good and a bad leaver clause in the agreement, saying that a bad leaver, then you lose everything, right? That's the roughest way of doing it, but it's also something that gives the board the mandate to just kick that person out, and you don't get stuck with a lot of shares. And if it's shares bought, the same thing would be this clause saying that the company, company have the right to either the lowest of market price or cost and acquire it back. So I think that is the easiest way, but it's always a challenge because it may be vested options and it may be so it's often like it ends up with some sort of a dialogue and an agreement, but just make sure you have the best cards at hand as a company in that situation there.